رب بالسبع المثاني وبقرآن معظم أصلح اللهم شاني واكشف الهم مع الغم.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to another live on another part 2 of the situation of the Ummah. Whether you may be following Pakistan and with what's happening in Pakistan, what's happening in Gaza as we speak. The treachery of Egypt is again there to see for everyone in what's happening in Gaza. And now with what has been taking place in Sudan. So inshallah, what we did is, in order to continue the discussion, part 2 of Game of Nations, which in reality would be a very good discussion to have with all of these pieces connected, from all the way from Pakistan to Sudan to Gaza to all of Africa can be discussed, and all of it is being, it's a chessboard that is being moved around by the same people in many ways, subhanallah. So to discuss part 2 of Sudan, what is taking place in Sudan, why is Sudan important, what is it that we need to know, and why as Muslims should we even care about what's happening in Sudan or what's happening in Pakistan, the effects of nationalism, the reason why the Muslims need to be aware. And from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, brothers and sisters, that said that a Muslim who wakes up in the morning and does not care for the affairs of the Muslims is not one of us. So inshallah, to discuss this part 2 of Sudan, we have again Brother Yusuf. Brother Yusuf was on last time discussing part 1 of Sudan, who was half Sudanese. And it's funny because Brother Yusuf is partly from Pakistan and partly from Sudan, and I'm sure he's trying to figure out how to bring this all together in his mom is from Sudan, his dad from Pakistan. So I am sure there's a lot of discussion that takes place in his household regarding the crisis taking place in both countries. And then we also have Abu Talha. All of you know Professor Abu Talha very well. Speaker, activist, da'wah carrier, moves around throughout the world discussing ideas and ideological Islam, making the Muslims aware and creating the awareness that is needed so badly for the Ummah. So inshallah, let's begin in the interest of time. Both Brother Yusuf and Abu Talha, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Let's begin this. Abu Talha, let's start with you. What is your take on this, Sheikh? I mean, let's start with, I guess I'll put an idea in your mind. Let's start with the meeting takes place before the fighting begins. And how does this work? And it seems there's a compound, they all come together and they say, let's start firecrackers. How does this work, Sheikh?
Well, to understand this, we need to know that Sudan, since the independence that it took from Egypt, which I think I will call it unfortunate, it's not really independence, it's a breaking of a super country into 2 countries, big still. Since that time, Sudan break away was orchestrated by U.S. agents in the area. And Miles Copeland, the author of the Game of Nations, which I admire you that you use this Game of Nations to be part of the title here. Breaking of this big country because a large country in the Muslim world is a threat, is a potential threat, of course, because of the huge resources, water resources of the Nile, the minerals in the Sudan, etc., and the large fertile lands of Egypt. That makes it a potential powerful country that can be a real threat to the Western interest, in particular after the Second World War, that was the American interest. That's the old story. Since then, Sudan had gone through several military coup d'etat, of course, sometimes followed up by some elections, bringing some leader into the based on the elections, and then kicking him away out by like Sadiq al-Mahdi at one point. And then eventually we had this the so-called the revolution that started with the power or al-hurriya wa taghyir, the freedom or liberty and change forces, who were able to make an impact such that Omar al-Bashir was forced into prison to leave the presidency. And then we know that there was agreement at the beginning that they were able to comprise this called the Committee to Rule Sudan, which consists of civilians from the forces of the liberty and change, as well as the military. And on top of the military segment was the Al Burhan, who became the head of this, let's call it the committee or the organization, and the Hamdouk, who was the prime minister. They agreed that within 21 months of the formation of the forming this unit, they will move into the next stage of actually transferring the country into a civilian state with civilian rule, and the military will move back to their barracks. That's the agreement. So 21 months passed. So this was in 2019. 2021, just few days before the timeline or the before the time which was set for this transfer, there was a military coup. And this military coup eventually was disclosed that it was a played coup. It was a fake military coup which was orchestrated by the military in power, Hmeiti, as well as Al Burhan. And with that military coup, they arrested the prime minister and many other people from the revolutionary committees, if you will. And then another agreement came, and they call it Al-Wathiqa Al-Dusturiya, the constitutional document, which had, again, a 2 years time frame. After 2 years, it will expire, and then we move to the transfer. So the time here, the 26th of April, was the real time to do the transfer. Now, again, of course, we know that the military does not want to give up the power. And who was behind the military, in this case, the Americans, they did not want to give up the control of Sudan to the, let's say, to the control of the people, irrespective of who leads the people and who are the ones who stand behind them. That's not the issue. The issue is that there was a revolution, and the power of the change and liberty, they were the so-called the leaders or the responsible for the continuation of this revolution. So 26th of April comes, and before that, almost 13 days, on the 13th of April, there was a big meeting or a small meeting. I'm not sure how many people really attended, but it was one of the compounds which belonged to one of the elites, and there were diplomats, international diplomats, where their names were not disclosed, but the news that came out from the people, from the powers of the change and liberty, they claimed that both Al Burhan and Hmeiti, either they were present themselves or their representatives were in that meeting one day before the war erupted. So immediately the next day, on the 14th, the war erupted. So now the whole scenario shows that as in the military coup which took place in the year of 2021, which was the reason to delay the transfer, now this comes in to spoil this big event that was coming up as a celebration to the people in Sudan, coming up within a few days. Then there was a war, and this war erupted. And of course, we know that during this time frame, the power or the military caravans of Hemeti were marching all the way from Darfur to Khartoum, and the government of Sudan was reporting that we see that the big jeeps, the big cars, and the military vehicles were moving, and they were allowed to continue the movement until they became part of Khartoum. So that, which means now we claim that the forces are interconnected. They are between the houses, between the civilians, and the war now becomes a bloody war against the civilians. So no one can raise their voice from the real people. Now these are fighting powers, both of the same camp. See, both in the same camp. Both they met one day before the war erupted. And all I can think about is that the whole war between them and the fighting was orchestrated to block the continuation of the revolution of the people, which
Brother,
was aimed at. Ah,
I was just going to go
go
to
ahead.
Brother Yusuf on a second. Brother Yusuf, I mean, you're listening to what Abu Talha is saying. I mean, is this a reality? Meaning, as far reality on the people, do they understand this on the ground? That meetings are being put together. Both so-called opponents in public are friends who are implementing, literally a foreign powers' interest on the ground. From what has happened in the last few days, I guess, it's been now 3-4 weeks. Well, it's been years, but I'm saying with at least with the fighting, has this any type of awareness has happened to the people? And number one, and number two, if you can, the opposition, is it still there? Have they been killed? Did the people leave the country? What's the deal? As far as the opposition that was supposed to come in power, the civilian part.
Okay. So first is a question on the awareness of the people, and the second one's on the opposition. So with all of these activities, there's always preparation involved first to prepare the public opinion. Because if they just go and do things the old way, let's say, they don't work anymore because of the Arab Spring. And I think this is generally speaking across the Arab world anyway. There's a level of awareness anyway. People have seen what happened in Tunisia. People have seen what happened in Egypt. If you go to these countries, people understand. Okay, Sisi Mubarak went, and then Sisi came, and Sisi was basically the same as Mubarak. So Morsi's time in office was just a change of, just ahead, but the regime didn't go. The deep state was still there. This kind of awareness does exist. People did understand that. That's why that's why when Bashir was pushed aside by the defense minister at the time, Bin Auf, and he came, assumed the transitional council. The first time he made that announcement, like a hero, we've moved him because the people have asked for it. Nobody accepted it from him, and the protests remained because it's pretty obvious. Same regime, same system. Which is why then he had to resign and had to bring up an unknown figure in Burhan, promote him, I think, 2 ranks up so that he can become the chief of staff as an unknown figure, because him being the defense minister, people understood that. So there's a level of awareness, and that's since then they've been working a lot. By they, I mean who's behind Burhan and who's behind the forces of freedom and change. Behind Hamid, even behind the political parties, there's always a period where they try to prepare the public opinion because they need things to work. And there's 3 levels here, which is that they're trying to convince the general public of a story to justify what's going to happen next. That's one. Second is they're trying to convince the people who are, let's say, part of the system, whether they are government or opposition. So people who are, for example, the ones in negotiation between the military on one side, Burhan's people, for example, and the forces of freedom and change, the FFC, the people you're referring to as the civilians. That's like a second group of people who they need to convince as well and work on. And the third group is people who are not part of this, but they're politically aware or activists and so on and so forth. So before the actual breakout of the fighting, there was a few weeks where they were preparing this conflict. And so people on the ground, the general people, generally speaking, were buying it. but that's because they don't follow politics as closely. But those other two groups, they kind of saw it for what it was, which was the 4th of April or the 6th of April was a time when they were supposed to sign the final agreement and then hand over completely to a new transitional government, civilian government, on the 11th of April this year. But between the 20th of March and the 6th of April, 20th of March was the final workshop as part of the December Framework Agreement, where the army, them and their representatives sat in the final negotiations with the Freedom and Forces of Freedom. I'm just going to say FFC for simplicity. FFC, Forces of Freedom and Change, those political parties, on the role of the army, restructuring the army, and so on and so forth. From then, 20th of March until the 6th of April, in the media, it was just Burhan and Hamiti. They were attacking each other. They were bringing up issues from those meetings and saying, we don't agree on this. I don't want this. I'll make it this long, a transition period, make it 10 years, now make it 2 years. And they were building up this story that they're not on the same side anymore. And that was people saw that because they've done this coup before, as Abu Talha mentioned, and it was pretty obvious that they're trying to cancel the framework agreement by saying the army is now split into two, as opposed to one signatory, so that agreement can't work if the army isn't one side anymore. And my view is that they changed the plan. So it was initially we're going to go on like this until people believe it, and then we will go back to the FFC and say, we have to start new negotiations for a new transitional period, which is going to take another probably year, 2 years of negotiations and mediation between other countries and traveling. But when they realize that it's not working, then they decided to change the plan. We have to make it believable now. And we have to force it. They were going to forcefully shift the political life in Sudan from negotiation between FFC and army to one which is only between the military forces. And the easiest way you can do that is obviously start a war. And no other opinion matters in this point. You have to get these two to stop fighting. Nothing else can move forward until these two stop fighting.
Abu Talha, a question here. I mean, one thing you said, the Brother Yusuf was saying that, look, the people in the region are not following, let's say, politics as closely as we are. We have, number one, how important is it? I mean, is that, I mean, forgive me for my ignorance, is this that the Muslims themselves, there is no thought process amongst the Ummah at this point, and that anything can just go through? Anyone can come and do whatever they want. I mean, you see, I'm sure you're following what's happening in Pakistan. One day, some guy gets arrested, whole country is completely destroyed. 2 days later, he's released, destroying everything in its path. And same rat race continues. So why is it that this ummah, upon which so much is happening, or upon whom so much is taking place, on behalf of this ummah, and we are the least aware of what's happening to us, other than what can we do? I mean, this is what we hear from this ummah.
Well, brother, here the issue is not the awareness. I'm pretty sure the ummah, maybe at the first day or second day, they can be taken at a surprise. They may not realize what's happening. But after the second, the third, the fourth, after a few weeks, the ummah start to realize, whether in Sudan or outside Sudan, for this matter, is that there is an orchestration, there is a play being done to steal the revolution of the ummah that took place in Sudan, irrespective, as I said, of who actually took the lead in that revolution. Just as in this Arab Spring, as Brother Yusuf was saying, the ummah revolted, came out on the street. Then some people took that event of the movement of the ummah and utilized it for their benefit. That's fine. But the ummah at the end of the day will be able to realize. And I don't think it's a paradox for the ummah in Sudan to realize that both Hmeiti and Al-Burhan, they work in order to steal the revolution of the people and to push them away, so that each and every one will hide, so he will not be killed. These are people who don't have arms. This is one. Second, the ones who have the keys the keys to the governance and to the authority and to the sovereignty of the state, these keys are in the hands of the enemies of the Ummah. Army generals who were actually raised and treated and made and created by the Western power, either Americans or British or whoever, mostly those top generals like Sisi in Egypt, like all generals in Syria and generals in Iraq, etc., and Sudan, and even in Tunis now, and in Pakistan. It turns out, and later on the news which is hidden today, tomorrow will be visible. It's in the hands of the ones who really work hand in hand with the intelligence apparatus in America and Britain in particular, and maybe the French and some others. But this is a reality.
By the way, when you mentioned that, Abu Talha, I just wanted to let you know there was a news piece today. There was a discussion going on by the people, Indian intelligence, so-called RA. I'm sure you know. And in the discussion, one of the ex-chiefs of RA literally says, look, although we're discussing Sudan, I just want to, because something that you mentioned here, said that, can you imagine if in this chaos, a cult like Hizb ut-Tahrir takes over? I'm talking yesterday's news.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a cult? Of course, they want to, whatever it is, they don't want to. But for me to hear that, because I was listening to see what's going on, and for two chiefs, ex-intelligence, military of India, to sit there and say, imagine it's better for us to see this chaos go on, but the problem with this chaos is that imagine a cult like Hizb ut-Tahrir takes over, then what do we do? I'll send you that clip. It would be very interesting for you to see, and to Brother Yusuf.
They were talking about Pakistan?
Yes.
Or Sudan?
Pakistan. But I'm saying that when you talk about, obviously, I'm coming from the perspective of chaos in the Muslim world, and the intelligences in the world.
Brother, that piece is very relevant. It's very relevant because now that comes to the issue is, yes, there is a revolution in Sudan, and there was one in Egypt, and there was one in Tunis, and we were able to hijack it. But the question comes, what if in this chaos, a group that really knows what it should be doing, like Hizb ut-Tahrir, has a plan, has an objective, has a well-structured vision in their mind, man, that would be disaster. Then we have learned from the facts that during chaos, you have to be very careful how to manage. These are crises you need to manage. To manage what? Means to make it impossible for people who really know what to do and who can be a real threat to the overall hegemony of the West over the Muslim world, not to be able to come close to this area. So we better do something. Now in Sudan, going back to Sudan, let's create a war. Now during war, everybody ducks down. That's natural. You have to duck down, even if you have your plans, whether you are Hizb ut-Tahrir or the forces of the Liberty and Change, or the Jabha al-Islamiyya, or the group of al-Mahdi, Sadiq al-Mahdi, and the Mahdi group, irrespective, which is called the Ummah cult or the Ummah party, whatever it is. Now, among these people, whoever would come to power, maybe someone would have a vision and can overthrow all our accomplishments over the last 100 years of confiscating the wealth of the Ummah, the sovereignty of the Ummah, etc., etc. That's what they will do, even if they create a fake war between them, just like Libya. Now, Libya, although there are some differences between Libya and Sudan, but all interested parties in the West are interested in the war in Libya to continue running so that people with plans, with objectives, with visions, with sincerity to the Ummah will not find a place. You cannot even move, you cannot walk, you cannot even breathe within this environment. And by the way, there was today a discussion on Palestine and the creation of the entity in Palestine. I was supposed to be there. I was not able to. My internet was bad, but the same thing, the creation of this Palestine, the Jewish state in Palestine, and then the whole war or wars that took place in 1948, in 1956, in 1967, in 1982, then in the 90s and in 2006. All of these, almost every 10 years or less, there is a big war, and in between there are clashes, so that
I see what you're saying.
even the one who is waiting for just to breathe and to be
Yes.
able to do something in Syria or in Egypt or in Jordan or in Lebanon will not be able to, because everybody is busy either fighting or shooting or ducking down. And then you have your objective. You will not be able to speak to anyone or to talk or penetrate. That is a plan. That is the game of nation. That is how to subjugate people, to keep them under the pressure or under the shoes of the super empires in the world. And that's exactly what's happening in Sudan. Sudan is a very powerful country. The nation in Sudan, the people in Sudan, one of the most energetic in the world. In fact, the so-called the stereotype that spreads around the people in Sudan, which is a stereotype by the British who controlled Sudan for a long time, and then the Americans, that, oh, this nation is helpless, it's lazy,
Lazy.
it's
Yeah,
not
I
able
heard that.
not able to produce its or to utilize its resources. This is a big lie. It's a big lie. Sudan is one of the most active nation in the world politically. When I was a student in the old Soviet Union, the most active students in all types of parties, whether in the communist, whether in the nationalist, whether in the Islamic groups, were the Sudanese. In the United States, when I was at the university, which is really, it has a rainbow of students, the most active students in all types of political schema were from Sudan. So Sudan is not a country that you can control easily. You have to always keep it up on the feet. Armies, coup d'etat, military coups, split of south and the north, a war for more than 10-15 years lasted, and then immediately after that a war breaks in Darfur and being financed by the same power that control the rest of the Sudan. That's not accident, because Sudan is important. Sudan is big. Before the split of Sudan, Sudan was one of the largest countries space-wide in the world, space-wise. Sudan has one of the most rich resources in the world in terms of minerals, gold, nickel, uranium, gas, oil, land, fertile land. It's very, very rich. It's much, much more rich than any of these countries in the Gulf where I am sitting right now. Much, much more rich in its resources. That's why the interest in Sudan to keep it under control and to make sure that any movement, excuse me, any movement will not be able to penetrate. And if you see the way they dealt with Sudan is different than any other country. The revolutions took place in the what we call it the Arab
Meaning,
Spring, in Syria, in Egypt, in where else? In Yemen, and partially in
Libya,
Bahrain at one
Tunis,
point in time,
anyway. Yeah.
and Libya. The way they dealt with it, they made sure that the army remains in power, and when the time based on agreement comes for the talks about the transfer, they did not hesitate a second to launch a war that kills people right and left. And who controls now the negotiations that take place in Jeddah or in Sudan?
I mean, that's the
It was
thing.
all under.
What do we know about that, Sheikh? I mean, I don't know, Brother Yusuf. I don't know if you have. I've heard in the last 2-3 days there have been meeting taking place in Saudi Arabia regarding. I
Yes.
guess they're all meeting there, and I don't know. I wonder what the discussions are about. I mean, it's funny that the Americans are there, and no one else is there other than Saudis.
Only the Americans
Yes.
and their agents, only. And in the meantime, look who got a little bit frustrated. Not me or you. We are frustrated for other reasons, but the British. The British. They asked the Security Council to convene for Sudan, because now their ability to interfere is taken away from them. They cannot even interfere. America took all the parties to Jeddah. Let's talk in Jeddah privately. Nobody knows what's happening, and then whatever is going to happen in Sudan will be the result of what's being talked in Jeddah. Talks between whom? Between both military agents. The
So how,
people
Brother Yusuf, let me ask you
are
this.
not even part of this talk.
I'm going to come back to that, Abu Talha, because that's a very interesting point. But Brother Yusuf, have you ever had a chance to discuss the points that these points, let's say, with the opposition parties? Have you ever had any kind of discuss? I mean, obviously you are in and out of Sudan, and you've lived there, you've studied there, and stuff kind of thing. What was your impression when you talked to these activists or the revolutionaries or people who are on the ground?
On the recent events, it's only been conversations online, to be honest, because it's only happened recently, and I'm currently in the
No.
UK.
I'm saying in
But
general. I
when
mean, obviously Sudan is a very active place. This has been going on for 4 or 5 years now, and before. But when you are there, or when you were there, what do you see when you present the ideas that you present?
So it's like what I mentioned before. They deliberately targeted themselves. They're actual target for the foreign powers, for the Americans, for the British, for the Germans. I'm not sure if I mentioned it last week, but even during the revolution, that the British ambassador was praying with the protesters. He's a Pakistani guy, the ex-ambassador, not the current one.
Yeah, I remember. I was
And the
shocked.
German ambassador, and the German ambassador was sitting again in the sit-in in front of the military headquarters. People from the army couldn't enter, but he could. People from the previous regime couldn't enter that area, but the German ambassador made it in, and he sat down with people. So these activist types who are not strictly aligned to any established political party, because they're active, they have links, they can pull a movement, they know people. They're of great interest to the foreign powers, and you find that there's a lot of ideas in their head, and sometimes contradictory ideas, but they can't see the contradiction. And those contradictory ideas are coming because they're listening to so many different people. So you'll find that there's a general agreement amongst all the foreign powers on broad lines. Everyone's saying there has to be democratization, there has to be liberalization, secularization of Islam. That transition has to occur. Everyone's in agreement to that. USA, UK, Britain, France, everyone's saying that. And the old regime has to go, and they have to become more like the West and adopt human rights and all these kind of things. So there's a lot. So there's a certain narrative which is common. They hear it from all sides, but then they don't notice the subtle differences in terms which creates confusion amongst them, and they can't see it themselves, and they may end up parroting opinions and advocating opinions which are very particular for one foreign power, and they assume everyone's saying the same thing because everyone's quoting everything they're saying in democratization, transition, and so on and so forth. Everyone's saying the same thing. But for example, there's some who are being very, and even now they've come back again because of what's happening. I'll explain how. They've come with this mantra again. All sides, all political parties, everyone in Sudan has to be involved in transition. That sounds like an innocent statement, sounds like an obvious statement, and it sounds like something all foreign powers say, but it isn't actually. It's not what the US says. It's not what the US says. It's what the UK says. And the difference is this: when you say that, you're also including the previous ruling party as well. You're including Omar Bashir's National Congress in that as well. And Omar Bashir's National Congress is not by itself; it's connected to the former Jabhat Islami, the Islamic Front. And there's a lot of people who are still there, and they have power and influence and not economic influence, and they've been pushed out because they are of previous regime, but they are aligned to the USA. So when you say everybody has to be involved, you're saying these people, they're allowed to come back in, even though the revolution was supposedly kicking them away. Whereas the UK has been saying more like just restructure the army. It's just focusing on that, restructuring the army, which is not something the USA is saying. So the people get confused because everyone's saying democratic transition. But then those nuance points, those differences in terms of a vision of how the country should be, they're not really picking at that. So you find a lot of the arena is very muddied. There's so many different opinions coming there. A lot of it though is parroting foreign powers, and you'll find people who will say they'll parrot something from a foreign power, and then they'll agree with something I would say, and then they try to like merge the two together, and they don't work because like we have to be an independent state. Something I would say. So then we have to be an independent state that deals with foreign powers on an equal footing. But to get to that, we need the transition, and to get the transition, we need help from the foreign powers. So you end up with this kind of
Sheikh,
fiction.
Abu Talha, what is the role of the Islamists in all of this? Because, I mean, obviously, Ikhwan played a big role, it seems. Hassan al-Turabi came out at least as Islamist, and then Bashir and all of these guys. I mean, it's what's so crazy, Sheikh, is that I'm bringing some similarities with what's happening in Pakistan. Obviously, it's on my mind, but Pakistan PTI plays the whole Islamic card. That what they call it, Riyasat-e Medina. They want to bring the Riyasa of Medina. They want to bring this. And then Imran Khan plays on that. And then in Sudan, you see the same thing where somehow, somewhere, at the end of the day, they have to bring some part of Islam in order to still keep the people on the road. I mean, so how does this work, Sheikh? What is the role of the Islamist? Has been, and why have they been fooled so often?
Well, Sudan, as I mentioned, number one, broke away from Egypt, which was absolutely anti-Islamic move. The resources of Sudan are being utilized and confiscated and stolen by the powers from the West and their agents in Sudan. The people are suffering very deep poverty because the system is implemented upon them is an oppressive one. As the group of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Sudan always points out, that the only way to get away from the mess, this fighting among the tribes, trying to break the country yet into 2 or 3 more states, is absolutely ridiculous. It's unaccepted, politically incorrect, and Islamically haram. So to stop all of this, you need to bring the system of Islam to the governance, to the authority. So the authority must be transferred to the Islamic movement that knows what to do. In fact, this transfer should not go to the power of the liberty and change. Should not go to this movement of liberty and change. Should go to the Islamic leadership. But to do that, lots of work that needs to be done. It needs to be done on the public, so the public opinion, the majority of the people should understand that their only way out of this mess is the Islamic rule completely, Islamic system, Islamic constitution, Islamic leadership, Islamic laws. All of this should come out of Islam. This people should understand that. Now, how do people understand that? You use the cases that exist today, the problems, the deep problems that have not found any solution, whether under Numeri or under Bashir or under before him, what's his?
Sadiq Amin, you have Hassan
Mahdi
Turabi
Sadiq,
and Mahdi.
all of them, and the other military rulers. No change. In fact, more poverty, more problems, more confiscation of the land, more breaking away. So Islam is the only solution. Islam as a state, as a system, as a leadership. It's not Islam as rituals. It's not Islam as just general court system, but as a complete comprehensive system, as a culture, as education, as industry, as industrialization. All of this, that's what should happen. Now, we know that all of these events, as I mentioned earlier, that take place in Sudan in particular, since that's what we are talking about, is devoted completely and directed at preventing the people in Sudan from seeing what is right and what is the real future for them and making it happen. Because if you let them in their deep poverty without causing continuous problems to them, at some day they will see the truth and then they will move toward it. So I need to prevent or to make a block between you and what is the actual solution, so you don't see that solution. And the ones who have the solution will be a block between you and the people, so you cannot directly talk to them and tell them this is the solution. Because you have the solution, I have the solution, the Muhammad Jama has the solution, Muhammad Uthman has the solution, we have the solution. But there is a block between you and the people of Sudan in particular, so they don't hear it. And there is a block in front of their eyes. They don't allow them the time to look and see, because they are too poor, too involved. There are lots of actions happening on a daily basis. And eventually, if nothing works, then let's get the factions fight. The army against the what's called the quick response, the rapid response group, which they created this name out of nothing. So they split the military into two groups, and these two groups, they can fight at any point of time, so that you can duck down, so you don't look up and see what the truth.
The rapid forces was never part of the military, the paramilitary, the so-called whatever.
Oh yeah, it was part of them. It was built during the Numeri time, and they organized it in a manner that it can be used as support, as assistance to the military. And Ahmedi was part of the committee for ruling in Sudan during this transition period. He was the vice the vice manager or vice president of the current group. And him and Burhan, they were friends all the time, and they were raised by Omar al-Bashir. He raised them. He actually organized them. He brought Ahmedi, who was a drug dealer on the grounds, on the streets, and he made him a general. He raised him up, and he gave him all of this power. So that is going back to who really controls all of this within the game of nation. The guy coming from the intelligence, from the West, from America, he is the one who is orchestrating this, because at some point of time you need an event that's ready to be created, so that no one can talk, no one can see, no one can open his mouth. The only thing you can talk today, please stop the war, stop the fighting. That's all you can do. And then America takes them to Jeddah and makes this all agreement. Wait, at what point of time it's right to stop this fighting, so that the people now are no longer able to pursue their objective. So going back to the real solution here, it's Islam and nothing but Islam. Nothing works. Left groups doesn't work. The so-called patriotism doesn't work. Militarism doesn't work. Democracy, of course, had failed all over. Today we have seen the largest democracy in the world. The president of the largest country in the world, Trump, is being convicted as a sexual assault man. This is what democracy is. The biggest democracy in the world, leave alone if it's even it comes to...
But it's freedom of choice, you know.
Yeah, freedom of assault, freedom of garbage, freedom to kill people, freedom to kill nations, freedom. That's what the freedom is, to do everything wrong. When it comes to something right, you are not free to do something right. You are suppressed. I have freedom to bring up my system and to challenge the people ideologically, politically. You are not allowed. You are not free to do that. So that's what is missing in Sudan and what's missing in Pakistan.
No, I understand, Brother Yusuf. The issue with
if I may add,
in Syria.
Go ahead, Brother Yusuf.
What's missing in Syria? What's missing in Egypt? What's missing all over? And that's my duty, your duty, his duty, the people's duty, to open their eyes and see, look, we have no choice to survive, leave alone to revive.
But Brother Abu Talha, look, and you can add, Brother Yusuf, there's no question about that, right? I mean, but why is it that, look, you're saying there's a barrier there, there's a wall there, your ideas cannot reach to the people, or at least they're trying to create all types of barriers so that ideas are not even discussed, and that's obviously the hypocrisy of democracy. But then how do we work this? What do we do? What do we do, Brother Yusuf? You being, in Sudan, obviously, because we're talking about Sudan. Why? What happens if you discuss these ideas in Sudan? Why, when you have all-out discussion saying that, look, at the end of the day, what is freedom? What is independent state? What is it? Do you even understand these terms? What is the? Are the clear answers ever given to you?
Okay, so just want to take a step back. I want to add to the list of things that don't work that Talha mentioned, because there's one which is very important, I think, in the context of Sudan. It's the case in most countries, but also what doesn't work is mixing Islam with other things as well. This is very important because Omar
say it doesn't
al-Bashir's
work in
used this
Sudan?
phrase, mixing
Mixing
Islam with
Islam with
other than
other.
Islam.
Yeah.
Mixing Islam, having like a hybrid Islamic democratic republic, something along those lines, which is what Sudan was meant to be. Turabi declared it the first and only Islamic state in the world in the early 90s. And since that model of an Islamic state was basically Islam as a name, few hudud rules, some economic rules, you have to give that to them, but then everything else was like filling in the blanks with the Western democratic republican federal system. That's what it was. And when you get that kind of mix, that's more oppressive than having a pure democracy or a pure Islamic. Obviously, pure Islam is not oppressive at all, because then you're justifying the oppression, and the people, they stay quiet, they accept it for a while because you've told them this is how Islam is, and they've accepted it. And then over time, when things get unbearable, then they blame Islam for what's happened. Yeah, so this is also dangerous. So also doesn't work as mixing Islam, because and a lot of Islamic movements that do not prepare for government. They are good activists, but they don't prepare for what they're going to do when they're in charge. Is they get to power and then they try to figure out to fill in these blanks, and what they do is just start borrowing everything from the West. And then borrowing from the West isn't just borrowing intellectually; it's also borrowing practically, because then you need help. You don't know how to do things physically, and then you get foreign assistance, whether from the UN or from ambassadors, and then you become a client state just through that. So that happens a lot.
Okay, go ahead. Abdullah,
Yeah, so
what he's saying, just to add, just so I don't miss the point. I mean, look, he's saying they are good activists, that they take, but once the power comes to them, they don't know what they're doing. On the other hand, can someone say to Hizb ut-Tahrir that you guys are good intellectuals, but you don't have practical experience?
Well, what practical experience did Lenin have before he made the largest power in the world after the United States? He was living in the West. He came and he made a party, and he had an ideology, a vision. Leave alone Lenin. What practice did Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had in running a country and building a state and organizing armies and
But they can say, he was being guided by wahi.
That's fine, but his method, his work is applicable to us, and we are required and ordered by Allah Azza wa Jal to follow his steps and to take example from him, not from others. I mentioned Lenin just for the people who don't understand the today's politics, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we are ordered to follow his example. So he had no experience whatsoever. He moved to Medina. Out of a sudden, he has to run a state. What experience did Umar al-Bashir running a state? Why do you apply that to Umar al-Bashir or to you don't apply that to Umar al-Bashir or to Hmeti or to Hamdouk or to al-Burhan? But what practice did they have before they took over power? Zero. What practice did Sisi have?
So their masters
Zero.
are giving them.
Oh, of course. Now our master is giving us. Our master, Allah Azza wa Jal, he is telling us how to rule. And he actually, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ لِتَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِمَا أَرَاكَ اللَّهُ. So Allah Azza wa Jal, he revealed this book to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he had showed him exactly how to rule. And that what he showed Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Muhammad showed us. So this is an excuse or a statement that's not even worth discussing among the people. People don't ask for what experience you have to rule the country. What experience does all of these ministers that are picked by the king or the emir or the prince or the president. So you run the State Department. Somebody academic maybe, or maybe he's a traitor, just an agent of someone. You become the Minister of Interior, you become the Minister of such and such and such. What experience these guys have? There is a guidance. They take it from somewhere. I take my guidance. I have a history of 1300 years of ruling. The ruling of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, Khulafa al-Rashidin, and the Tabi'in during the Bani Umayyah and Bani Abbas and Uthmaniyin, and I have a full history of ruling. I know the good part of the ruling, and I know the mistakes. I know what makes things the right way, and I know what are where you could fall, and I know the perfect one, which is the one by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What more experience you need? This is the best and the largest and the biggest and the most brilliant experience you can ever have to run a state, and we can do it. We have it, and we study it, and we learn it, and we extract the rules from it. So that's an argument which should be killed right on the spot by us, and the people would understand. During my work in this dawah, I've never faced this question, whether you are able to run a state or not. Once you start explaining the constitution, and once you start explaining how you can build the technological industry in the world, in the Muslim state, once you start explaining how you can distribute the wealth in a systematic manner, no one even in his right mind will be able or have the guts to question you whether you can rule or not, because I'm explaining exactly what is it that I want to do. That is the best example. And where do you get this from? I get it from the Quran and the Sunnah and the guidance made by the Khulafa al-Rashidin, at least, and then the real practice of Islam, and how the Islamic State grew up as a huge state. So that's not an issue. The issue is to be able to convince the people to give me the support. I don't want you to rush yourself with me. I know that the majority of the people will not be able to handle the job and the work of a dawah. So at least give me the support. At least don't be a block in front of me. Don't allow those traitors, those agents, those who work for the kuffar in the West, don't allow them to use you as a barrier against me. That's what I'm asking you. And then at some point, those people who have the real power in the country, the ones who have been made as an army, to convince them, instead of supporting and protecting regimes that do not belong to the Ummah in the first place and to Islam in the second place, give me the support and I will show you what we can do. Give me the support, give me the nusra, give me the power. You guys, you have the power. The enemies of Islam made your power here in order to protect the Jewish state and the occupation of Palestine, and to serve regimes that put all the resources of the Ummah under the control of Britain and France and America. Don't do that. That's what I'm telling. Don't do that. Let us continue our work. Now, of course, this is easier said than done. It requires patience, it requires endurance, it requires a strong belief in Allah Azza wa Jal, that Allah will support me. It requires belief in Jannah. It requires the belief in Jannah on the day of judgment, that I will be rewarded in the everlasting life. So I can do that. Otherwise, it's very difficult, brother. Look, when you see what's happening in Sudan, you'll say, man, this is crazy. If I want to make a move, imagine what happens.
I mean,
Just
not
like
only
this,
that, I mean, it seems like it's even, I mean, it's killing going on. It's beyond, and subhanallah, with the amount of people dead in just a week, it's beyond belief, and the amount of injured. I mean, Sheikh, let me ask you, brother Yusuf, how. I know we were discussing this yesterday. You said there is possibility that Sudan can be divided in 5.
Yeah, so there's one point I want to mention just on the back of what Talha was saying before, because I remember I forgot the question you mentioned earlier about opposition. There's when it comes to government, there's, if you like, two sides to it. One is like a philosophical, ideological aspect, and the other is an administrative, technical aspect. And a lot of times, perhaps when people who grow up and live in the West, we look at the technical administrative side and say, obviously, that requires skills. How are you going to run that? Activists can't do that job. Activists can't be civil servants unless they've actually worked in a civil service job, for example. And that's not the failure of a lot of people in the opposition, and not just Islamic opposition. So the failure of the Islamic opposition is that they didn't prepare an Islamic ruling system. They didn't prepare an Islamic program. The ideological, philosophical aspect, that side was missing, but also the others as well, whether that's the leftists or the right wingers and the people following the West. Is the issue was never in Sudan about who's going to run the administrative technical aspect, because you can use the same infrastructure apparatus that exists anyway. People who already have experience in those roles. It's always missing. What is your program? What's your actual? What are you going to implement from what's your ideology? What's your the political philosophy side of it? What's the actual program you're going to bring forward when you're in government? That's the failure. So what the Islamic movement did, they failed at doing that, but they were able to galvanize the population because people believe in Islam. They came to power, then started filling in the gaps. And Sudan was a Islamic state apparently, but also a democratic state, and also a republic, and also secular, and also a federation as well, all at once. And it took Bashir 9 years, I think 9 years to actually introduce a constitution. And when he did, it was I can't give a particular percentage, but so many sentences were like copy paste of the original Sudanese constitution of 1925, the one the British used to organize the colony. There's also just copy pasted points from there. And then when they made a new constitution in 2005, it was under American supervision. They might as well have wrote it themselves. So all of this is just you end up borrowing, and the other side, the non-Islamist side of the opposition, they're not even putting any effort anyway in thinking about anything alternative. They're just parroting anything that comes from the West. And it's for that reason that the opposition, I think, right now, there hasn't been any killings or assassinations because there's no need to. All you need to do, because again, these are people which both sides are trying to win over. There's people who the Americans are trying to win over, and the British are trying to win over. They're not aligned to any particular country, but they are aligned to foreign culture, if you like, to the political culture of the West, and they want to be integrated into the international community. Because remember, Sudan's got sanctions and it's cut out from a lot of. It's not a natural country. There's a lot of things we can't do that.
Sheikh, I can't hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things we can't do in Sudan compared to other countries because of the American sanctions and so on and so forth. Like even the other day, I was just thinking, I want to boost a post on Facebook in Sudan so that people can see it, and I can't because you just can't do it in Sudan. You can do it in South Sudan, you can do it in other countries, but it's just blocked out because of the American sanctions. So there's people who want to improve their life. They feel they need to be integrated into the international community. So then they are open to being bought and won over. But then all foreign countries, powers are trying to fight and win influence over these people. So they're not people to be killed yet, but they're people to be controlled. So there are a lot of people in the opposition. They've, as Abu Talha has mentioned, ducking out of the way. Lots of people have left Khartoum. Some people have even left Sudan. The opposition is broken apart.
So Abu Talha, for what we're saying, two things I want to ask you. Number one, no constitution. Seems like this is another thing. You see Taliban come in power in Afghanistan, and they don't have a constitution. They come in power, and then they somehow figure out, okay, now let's figure out how this is going to work. And then now you have a situation that happens Sudan. Okay, let's come in power, and then let's figure out what's going to happen. Sheikh, why is that? Is it that the Muslims are just Sheikh? I mean, are we not studying Islam? That's why they just can't ever understand that there is a constitution, and then but they get into power, but they have no idea what to do with power. And secondly, Sheikh, I mean, is this why militaries can rule us? Because even civilians or intellectuals or whatever, they come into power and they have no clue what to do. And then the militaries, they say, well, obviously you don't know what the heck you guys are doing, so we're going to have to come and organize.
This is funny, brother. If I don't have, let's say, assume I come to power, I'm civilian with academic background, and I don't have the clue, or I have not organized myself, my constitution, the systems which I implement in economy and social life, in politics, etc., etc. And then someone from the military comes and tells me, "Look, you don't know what, how you want to do it." If I don't know how to do it, do you think you can do it? I'm the academic. I'm the one who can read. You can't even read. You don't. You probably during this last 20 years of you as a soldier, you have not read a single
No,
book
but
or
Abu Talha,
something.
that has been the reality for the last 50 years.
Yeah,
I mean, I understand it's funny. It is funny. Unfortunately,
it is.
I
It is
remember
funny.
I remember in Somalia, I was sitting in Mogadishu having a cup of coffee with someone, and they said supposedly some guy, he's supposed to be the head intelligence of some country, or Somalia at that time, and a guy was making fun, saying the guy can't even write his name in English. So,
Yeah.
but this has been the case for the last
No,
whatever
it
years.
is the case. Sure, it is the case. But what I'm saying here is the last one who is going to accuse me or to
Not you,
object to the
but what I'm
fact that,
saying, why is it that we are not ready when these
oh,
organizations,
no, we are ready.
not
The
not
Muslims are
not
ready. Look,
fine, okay,
look,
go ahead.
even the ones who have not written a constitution, who have not explored the details of how to run a government. I remember a talk with late Israr Ahmed, may Allah be bless
Rahmatullah
him, when
alayh.
he was alive. He was asked a question: is now you are organizing all of this movement, Tanzim Islam, and you are seeking state rulership. What? How are you going to govern using Islamic structure if you are if you ever reach that stage and you don't have in your literature the structure of a state, the systems, the constitution? His answer was very simple. He said, well, there is at least there is Hizb Tahrir around, he has it all. So I can use what they have. So that's, if there is a
So
sincere
that
one,
was his answer.
yeah, that was his answer. His answer, I don't have to repeat. Look, حزب التحرير has النظام الاقتصادي, النظام الاجتماعي, النظام الحكم. He has, and he had read all of these. At least he has these books. He has. I don't need to replicate them. They are ready to be used. So it takes a sincere Muslim or Muslim group, whether that whoever that Muslim group, if it's sincere and really wants to work it out the way Islam wants, doesn't want to work it out and say, okay, let's today start with the hijab, and tomorrow we'll start with the zakat, and the next day we'll start with the riba, and the fourth day we'll start with the non-Islamic companies, and which means the seriousness about implementing Islam the way it was implemented by the Prophet ﷺ, sometimes it's not there. So it's really not the absence of the literature. The literature is there. You don't have to create it yourself. You can find it just like you can find it in the book of Amwal for Bani Ubaid, when he was asked about the what do we do with the money. He wrote an entire book for one of the Khulafa. He said, this is the
Abu Yusuf also.
finances, al-amwal, no, not Abu Yusuf al-Kharaj.
Yes, he wrote
Al-Kharaj specific, but this al-amwal for Abu Ubaid, it was for all types of financial system in the Islamic State, and he collected all evidences, all daleels, all ahkam that are related. He said, please, here it is. Do you want to work justly and to distribute the wealth properly, justly among the people? Here's the, you need a book, I can give you a book in 2 days. You need Abu Yusuf al-Kharaj, for al-Kharaj.
So
Harun
Abu Talha,
al-Rashid
let me
said,
ask you: Are you saying that if there is power, let's say, not that this can happen, but Allahu alam, let's say tomorrow some guy from Sudan or some Pakistan, someone who can take power comes to Hizb, says, "We don't know if you can rule, but you have all the intellectual capacity, but we will rule. Give us the literature and teach us how to do it." The Hizb will do this.
of course, that's what the Hizb does. It teaches it before and after. In fact, the Iran, when Imam Khomeini made his revolution, the Hizb visited him and he said, if you don't have a constitution ready, here is one. I'm not asking us to give us the hukum. Since you are in power, you want to continue rule, here is a constitution, read it at least. Read it and see if you can benefit from it. They did not. They did not. And when the brothers in Afghanistan, in the first time, Taliban won, and there is Taliban 2 today, Taliban won, again, Hizb al-Tahrir offered them, he said, look, excuse me, I still have not recovered completely from my previous flu, so it keeps coming up
Inshallah,
once every 5-6 hours.
Inshallah.
But it's okay. So gave them the constitution, said, look, now you are in power. I'm not going to argue how you came to power, who helped you. Forget this for now. We know that ISI put you in power. We know ISI is the one that brought you. We know all of this. And we know the ISI, the Pakistani intelligence, whom they work for. All of this is known. But now you are in power. And you are Muslims. And we deal with you as Muslims. And you are in power. I'm not asking you to handle me the power. Take this constitution, take the system of economy, take this, please put it in practice. You need a constitution. Here is one. We've worked it out. If you don't like it, modify it. But at least put someone in practice. It's ready until you can. They rejected that. And they were absolutely, I'm not going to insult them, but they were not reasonable. Taliban 2, the recent one, same thing. The Hizb sent them a letter and gave them the books and gave them references for all things. Please do whatever it takes to put Islam in practice. You are in power. You claim that you liberated Afghanistan. Alhamdulillah. I'm not going to argue that. You are in power. Whether you liberated Afghanistan by power, whether America negotiated that with you in Qatar and they allowed you to rule, it's irrelevant now. Now, here is what you can do. They rejected. Same thing with Mursi. Same thing with Hassan Turabi at the time. Hassan Turabi, when he visited America as not as part of the government, but before that, and he sat with the Congress in America, he was in there, the Shabab, they actually talked to him and they said, look, now you are very close to the government, to the power in Sudan. Go and change the constitution to Islamic one. Said, no, it's not time, it's not ready yet. But what do you mean? You are in power. When are you going to be ready? If you are in jail, that's when you will be ready. You are in power now. So Hizb al-Tahrir did not make the structure and the literature and the ideological structure of the state as being copyrighted. It's our copyright. No one can use it but us. If you ever reach the power and I see that you are using Nizam al-Hukum, I will charge you in front of the court. I would say, oh, look, he's using my Nizam al-Hukum. This is crazy. We don't do that. I mean, today, even if someone in parliaments in the Muslim countries, although the whole parliament structure is illegal, but assuming that someone goes there and he says, I need some material to be able to discuss the validity of Islam and the Islamic rules in the parliament. You think we will tell him, get out of the parliament first and then I will give you? No, you are already there. You are already there. Take this. And if you don't understand it, I will teach you. I will explain it. I will devote the best of my talent to teach you even how to speak it, not how to just to present it, but how to present it and to be a convincing. That's what we do. Now, you can do that. You tell me this is very sophisticated constitution. We cannot do it. It's too risky because we will be in front of superpowers who will topple us the next day. This is not what we have agreed with the Americans or the British when we came to power. That's not what we agreed, so we cannot do it. Okay, get on the side and I can do it. Relieve yourself from all of these attachments. We know that when the Ikhwan in Egypt, there was a visit of a big group or delegation to the US who met with the foreign committee in the Congress, and they talked about how to rule in Egypt. So there is some commitments there. And we know that Taliban in power, they had some commitments to America to do this transfer, to allow the Americans to leave and to be able to protect certain interests there and whatever these agreements are. Now, you have commitments. You cannot go against your commitments, and you know the consequences. Move aside, let me deal with the consequences. I don't have any commitments. I did not make any promises to anyone. So I can do that. Instead of that, they arrest the brothers who gave them this material and who talked to them about how they should rule. I'm talking Afghanistan now. So this is the reality. So the reality, brother, the issue is not whether there is enough literature to use or the clarity of the ideas. That's not a problem at all. It's not a problem at all. It has never been a problem for any government in the world, whether it's Islamic or non-Islamic. You can always find the philosophical foundation or ideological foundation, as we call it. You can find the systems that are built upon that. You can find a collection of rules which are designed and very well structured. That's not a problem. Has never been a problem. The problem is the authority will never be given, will never be granted, will never be smoothly transmitted to any group that is absolutely committed to the using Islam as the revival method for the Ummah. This is a big statement.
No,
This big I'm sorry. The big statement about this issue of revival, it means the Psychus Pico is gone. Borders between Muslim nations will be gone. The education system will produce scholars in a very well defined manner from the first day you get into school until you become a alim. That is well structured. That's dangerous. Dangerous to the world order. That's dangerous to the cartel of oil that steals the oil of the world at large. That's dangerous to the financial system and the financial world order by the Fed Reserve in New York. This is very dangerous because it deprives these powers, these entities, from the bread and butter, the daily bread and butter of them, the gold and the oil on a daily basis. You deprive them. By this program you are handling, you are actually saying, I am here to provide a program that deprives the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Mellons and the Sachs, whoever, these people in power, I'm depriving them. I'm putting a method to deprive them from whatever they can steal from the world. I will cut the hand that steals the wealth of nations, not only the Muslim nations, in Venezuela, in Mexico, in Latin America, in China, in Taiwan, in Thailand, in Africa, in the Middle East. I will cut the hand that steals the food of the people. That is very dangerous. The issue is not whether you have the book or not. You have the will and you have the vision. That's the issue.
No, this is very important, Sheikh. This is very important because one of the things I think has to happen is making these ideas arm, especially the literature arm, making sure that these ideas, the books, get into the hands of anyone and everyone, and it has to be one of the things that we have to work on. Inshallah, that's something that's cooking in my mind. But here's the thing, Brother Yusuf, just last. If you, I mean, let's say, for instance, now you are talking to Muslims of Sudan, just in 30 seconds. I know it's a lot. I said the same thing to you last time. But please, Akhi, you are, what is the message, especially to the youth, that so they fought a very hard fight for how far they have come, and obviously that the world powers thought it was so dangerous that even maybe youth without much ideas, even that they're not willing to give them. What is your what would you want to give the youth of Sudan as we speak?
Okay, I'll try to keep it as summarized as possible. Number one is all of the problems of Sudan. All of the problems of Sudan are because there is instability in its basis. There is no ruling structure. It's all political. It's nothing else. The problem in Sudan is political. Number two, the cause of that is foreign interference, and foreign interference by the colonial powers or neo-colonial powers. This is starting. I think it's becoming a bit more trending now. Istamar al-Jadid, this phrase. Some people are starting to use it. The new colonialism. The US, UK, and by new because it's like there's regional powers involved. It's not just the old great powers anymore. There's also Egypt. There's also Saudi. There's also the UAE. There's also the Zionists and so on and so forth. There's lots of countries involved now. So one is you have to solve the political issue. Two is the foreign interference is the main problem for all of us. Three is therefore we need to solve this problem independently amongst ourselves, just amongst ourselves. Cut all foreign involvement. There's no need for mediators. There's no need for help with transition. There's no need for any ideas, no workshops, none of this stuff. Just amongst ourselves. And the only correct source to answer how anything was the correct way of doing things or the incorrect way of doing things, the only source is Islam. That's basically it. So focus on the politics. Completely, you have to realize the foreign interference is the problem. This is the main problem, and they have agents and tools in the region, inside the country as well. You have to cut all ties to them. Only have the conversation amongst ourselves, and it has to be an Islamic conversation. And we will come to an Islamic solution because like Abu Talha mentioned, the literature exists, the people exist, the activists exist. This heritage and intellectual wealth does exist, but so long as we build it ourselves. And the final point, and this is not really for the youth, but the youth can play a part in increasing the pressure and changing the public opinion, but it's to get people who have influence to affect people in the army. And people in influence Sudan is people who have, we say wajah, like their opinion is heard, whether they're tribal leaders or academics or so on and so forth, or people who are just big important people in the families, is they can influence officers to get rid of the agents who are in charge of right now the army and the RSF, because if they're not gone, the foreign interference will still remain, and nothing can get solved.
Abu Talha, that's the same bloodshed goes on in Pakistan, same bloodshed is going on in Sudan, same bloodshed is happening in Gaza. 30 seconds, please, no more than that. What do you have to offer? Somebody says you seem to know what you're talking about. Okay, what do you have to offer that will change this situation in such crisis for the last 50 years? Do you have a golden solution?
Yes. Yes. You cannot fight while you are not on your feet. So all the fights that take place today and since the last 60 or maybe 100 years, we were fighting while we are laying on the ground. So the result is obvious. You will be beaten time and time again in Syria, in Palestine, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Libya, in Yemen. Beaten. Stand up, the Ummah. You have to stand up on your feet. Our role is to take your hand and get you up, to revive you, to make you ready for the next step. The Ummah, you have to stand behind us, with us, alongside us, so we can create an entity that we call it the Khilafah state, which Allah Azza wa Jal promised us if we work it out correctly. Stand us for building the Khilafah. And then the Khilafah will be responsible for stopping all the bloodshed and punishing all those people who caused the bloodshed in the Muslim Ummah. It's time to make sure that the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the blood of a Muslim, one drop of a blood, is worth more than the Kaaba itself. Who is going to make that price for the blood of the Ummah? We will do it. You have to stand with us. Do we know what we want? Yes, we do. Do we know how to do it? Yes, we do. What do I need from you? I need you to stand up with me. You don't have to fight with me. You don't have to struggle with me. In order to struggle, you must have the power and the iman and the aqidah and the belief that I have. I'm not asking you to do that. This takes time, this takes power, this takes work. But at least don't be a barrier on my way.
Inshallah,
Don't allow yourself to block my path.
Inshallah, with that we'll end, brothers and sisters. Please make sure to tune in. Also, we are also working on the Pakistan situation as we're talking about Sudan now, but we do have live from Pakistan itself tomorrow night, inshallah. I think this is another thing that we need to be watching, because Pakistan is also going through a huge political turmoil, and this is the time that Abu Talha was talking about, Brother Yusuf were talking about. This is when the Ummah is looking for direction. It's tired. It's going from one crisis to another crisis. I was just talking to the brothers there in Pakistan a couple of hours ago before this morning, and they were saying, this is nothing new for us. At least for the last 6 years, we're just going over one turmoil to another. Things are just burning in front of us. The whole country is being burned down. In reality, for foreign powers, the same game that we are seeing in Sudan, the whole country is being burned down for foreign powers. Same thing we're seeing in Palestine and Sham and Tunis and Libya and subhanallah, anywhere we turn, the Ummah is literally burning. So it is time, brothers and sisters, time that we come out of this, this complex that we don't have what it takes. We need to go back to our history, and we need to look into the right movements. We need to get activated. We need to get to know the things that we need to know. We need to get to the books. We need to do everything possible. There is no nation that is suffering the way we are suffering. It's beyond belief what is happening to us. And we have nothing to contribute to what's happening to us ourselves, the kind of bloodshed that's taking place around us. Inshallah, we'll see you guys next week, Friday. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
لا لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل همام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل همام نحن فينا عمر صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر